The Slatewave Robotics boardroom fell silent as CEO Amara Slate pointed to the stainless steel trash can beside the podium. "Step into it, Mr. Reeves," she commanded, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Marcus Reeves, marketing VP, stared in disbelief. "I'm sorry? Your projections are garbage. Your strategy is garbage. So it seems fitting you should present from inside actual garbage," Amara said with a cold smile, "to match the report's quality." In the corner, Dean Marshall kept his head down, focusing on the circuit panel he was repairing. Just another invisible maintenance worker in gray coveralls. No one noticed as his knuckles whitened around his screwdriver. Marcus hesitated, then to the horror of his colleagues, stepped into the trash can. It wobbled as he balanced, clutching his tablet with trembling hands. "Continue," Amara commanded. "Sometimes trash isn't what's in the bin," a quiet voice interrupted. "It's what's coming out of the mouth." The room went deathly silent. Every head turned. Amara froze, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. Who would dare? Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Dean Marshall had never intended to become the center of attention. At 42, he'd spent the last 5 years of his life deliberately fading into the background. Night shift technical support at Slatewave Robotics suited him perfectly minimal human interaction, just him and the machines that needed fixing. Before dawn each morning, Dean would return to his modest apartment in Oakland, where his 13-year-old daughter Lily would be waking up for school. Their morning routine was a well-choreographed dance. He'd make breakfast while she showered, they'd eat together as she reviewed homework, and then he'd slip a note into her lunchbox before driving her to school. Today's note read, "Why don't planets tell jokes? Because they don't want to gas giants. Love, Dad." After dropping Lily off, Dean would sleep until mid-afternoon, then spend a few hours on household chores before heading back to Slatewave for another night shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and stability was what Lily needed after losing her mother. Few at Slatewave knew that Dean Marshall had once been Dr. Dean Marshall, lead hardware engineer for NASA's Artemis lunar module teams. Fewer still knew that he'd walked away from a prestigious career to care for his wife during her illness, or that after her death, he'd chosen a job with night hours so he could be present for his daughter during the day. In his locker at work, taped inside the door, was Maya Tran Marshall's old Slatewave ID badge. She smiled from the photo, her eyes bright with the intelligence that had made her one of the company's most promising systems architects. Dean touched the badge each night when he arrived, a ritual of remembrance. While polishing elevator panels or repairing circuit boards, Dean listened to astrophysics podcasts through wireless earbuds. The familiar terminology, flux, capacitance, orbital mechanics, quantum entanglement kept his mind sharp even as his hands performed tasks far below his qualifications. Amara Slate had earned her nickname, the Scalpel, through years of ruthless business decisions and public humiliations like the one Dean had witnessed in the boardroom. Employees whispered that she'd once fired an executive during his birthday celebration, having security escort him out, still wearing a paper party hat. Her boardroom was considered a psychological war zone. No one crossed Amara Slate and remained standing. Which is why, by lunchtime, the entire company was buzzing about the janitor's voice that had dared to challenge her. "Did you hear what happened in the executive meeting?" a young software engineer whispered to her colleague in the cafeteria. "Someone actually called out Slate for being cruel." "No way. Who would risk their job like that?" "Some maintenance guy. He just said it and kept working like it was nothing." By afternoon, someone had posted about the incident in the company Slack. The message spread through private channels and direct messages, gathering reactions and speculation. "Who is this guy?" became the question on everyone's lips. Dean arrived for his shift that evening, unaware of his new status as company legend. He clocked in at 8 p.m. as usual, collected his tools, and began his rounds through the mostly empty building. The night cleaning crew nodded to him with the familiar camaraderie of those who worked while others slept. At midnight, he stopped by the employee cafe for his usual coffee break. The barista, a college student named Javier, who worked nights to pay tuition, slid a cup across the counter before Dean could order. "On the house," Javier said with a grin. Dean raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" Javier just smiled and pointed to a sticky note attached to the cup. It read simply, "Respect." Confused but grateful, Dean took his coffee and continued his rounds. He didn't notice the whispers that followed him, or the way security guards gave him subtle nods of approval. The next morning, Dean's phone buzzed with a message from HR as he was driving home. The text was neutral in tone. "Due to scheduled maintenance in the main building, your shift has been reassigned to our warehouse facility for the next 2 days. Please report to 1850 Harbor Bay Parkway instead of the main campus. Standard hours apply." Dean frowned. No one had mentioned scheduled maintenance, and he would know he was the one who scheduled it. Still, he wasn't in a position to argue. The warehouse was farther from home, but the work would be the same. That afternoon, as Dean slept, activity at Slatewave headquarters continued to build around his name. A young engineer named Priya had been reviewing security footage from the boardroom incident as part of her job in the IT department. She'd zoomed in on Dean as he worked on the circuit panel, noticing something on his tool belt. "Guys," she messaged her team, "the maintenance guy has a NASA tag on his inner tool pouch. It says Artemis Recovery Team." That's classified stuff. Within minutes, someone had run a search on Dean Marshall. The results were eye-opening. "Former NASA engineer resigns to care for terminal wife." Read a headline from Wired magazine, dated 5 years earlier. The article featured a photo of a younger Dean in a NASA lab coat, standing beside complex equipment. "Single father walks away from stars for family," another headline proclaimed. The article detailed how Dr. Dean Marshall, one of NASA's most promising hardware engineers, had resigned from the Artemis lunar program when his wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. It quoted colleagues expressing shock at losing such talent, and Dean himself saying simply, "Some journeys are more important than reaching the moon." By evening, the Slatewave employee Slack channels were buzzing with this new information. "The janitor at HQ might have built half the Mars rover components," one message claimed, slightly exaggerating the truth. "He has a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, another correctly noted. Dean's name flooded internal message boards. Employees who had never spoken to him were suddenly experts on his background. A vice president quietly reposted the clip from the boardroom security camera with the hashtag "Dignity looks like this." Someone from IT confirmed, "He's got 3 patents under his name before working here. Guy's a literal rocket scientist." But the most shocking revelation came when an employee in HR, moved by the story, looked deeper into Dean's personnel file. His wife was Maya Tran Marshall, the message read. She worked here, systems architect in the early days, died after complications from a factory floor accident. The message included a link to her obituary, which mentioned she had worked at Slatewave until shortly before her death. Someone reposted it with the caption, "So this is why he stayed silent." As Dean prepared for his shift at the warehouse, completely unaware of his newfound fame, the pieces of his story were coming together in a way that would soon make it impossible for anyone at Slatewave, including Amara Slate herself, to ignore. By the time Dean arrived at the warehouse for his reassigned shift, the digital rebellion was in full swing. The company's internal messaging system had transformed into a virtual shrine to the quiet maintenance worker who had dared to speak truth to power. "Did you know he designed oxygen recycling systems that are still used on the ISS?" posted an engineer from R&D. "My cousin worked with him at JPL before NASA. Says he could troubleshoot hardware failures just by listening to them," added another. The warehouse supervisor, a gruff woman named Elaine who'd been with Slatewave for 15 years, gave Dean an appraising look as he signed in. "Marshall," she said, nodding slowly. "Heard you had an interesting day yesterday." Dean looked up, confused. "Just the usual. Circuit repairs, filter replacements." Elaine's mouth twitched. "Right. Well, we've got some conveyor belt sensors that need calibrating. East Wing, Section C." As Dean walked away, he didn't see Elaine pull out her phone and type, "He's here." Doesn't seem to know he's trending. In her corner office on the 30th floor of Slatewave headquarters, Amara Slate scrolled through her emails with increasing irritation. 3 separate board members had sent messages asking about the incident in yesterday's meeting. Her PR director had requested an urgent discussion about internal morale. Even her executive assistant seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact when delivering her morning espresso. "Cynthia," Amara called sharply. "What's going on today? Everyone's acting strange." Her assistant hesitated. "There's been some discussion about yesterday's marketing presentation." "The garbage presentation? What about it?" "Not the presentation itself, ma'am. The interaction with the maintenance worker." Amara's eyes narrowed. "What maintenance worker?" Cynthia swallowed hard and pulled up a video on her tablet. It was security footage from the boardroom, showing the moment when Dean had spoken up. The audio was clear. "Sometimes trash isn't what's in the bin. It's what's coming out of the mouth." "This has been shared how widely?" Amara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's everywhere, ma'am. Internal channels mostly, but there's more." She showed Amara the threads about Dean's background, his NASA credentials, his patents, his personal tragedy. Amara's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. Find out everything about this man, and I mean everything. Meanwhile, in the IT department, a senior developer named Raj was piecing together a more complete picture of Maya Tran Marshall's history with the company. He'd worked at Slatewave long enough to remember her brilliant, outspoken, one of the original architects of their operating systems. She raised concerns about the safety protocols in the manufacturing plants, he told his team quietly. "I remember because I helped her compile the data. She found critical flaws in the emergency shutdown sequences." "What happened?" Priya asked. Raj shook his head. "She presented it to leadership, and 2 weeks later she was gone. We were told she resigned for personal reasons. 3 weeks after that, we heard she died." The room fell silent. "Did anyone investigate?" someone finally asked. "It was ruled an unrelated medical emergency," Raj said. "But now I wonder." By midday, a VP from the legal department had quietly reposted the clip with the hashtag "Dignity looks like this." It was the first time anyone at that level had acknowledged the situation, and it opened the floodgates. Soon, directors and managers were adding their own supportive comments. "I've been in that room when she's torn people apart," wrote one product manager. "Wished I had the courage to say something. My team has lost 3 good people this year because of that toxic environment," added another. The most damning post came from a retired board member who still had access to the company channels. He simply wrote, "Maya Tran, Marshall raised red flags about faulty safety systems in early Slatewave factories, weeks before her accident. Some of us haven't forgotten." The post was deleted within minutes, but screenshots had already been saved and shared hundreds of times. At the warehouse, Dean remained oblivious to the storm brewing around his name. He worked methodically through his tasks, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of diagnostics and repairs. During his lunch break, he video called Lily to check on her day. "How was the math test?" he asked, sitting alone in the break room. "Pretty good," Lily replied. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing eyes that were startlingly similar to her mother's. "Mr. Peterson said my approach to the problem set was unconventional, but effective." Dean smiled. "That's my girl. Always finding your own path." "Dad?" Lily's voice turned serious. "Zoe's mom works at your company. She texted Zoe asking if she knew anything about you." Dean frowned. "About me? Why?" Lily shrugged. "Dunno. Zoe thought it was weird too. You're not in trouble, are you?" "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Probably just some HR thing." He changed the subject quickly. "Hey, did you get my note this morning? The planet joke?" Lily rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. "So lame, Dad. So lame." After they hung up, Dean sat staring at his phone, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. Something was happening, and he was at the center of it. Amara Slate prided herself on control. Control of her company, control of her image, control of every room she entered. But as she reviewed Dean Marshall's personnel file, she felt that control slipping. The file was unusually thin for a 5-year employee. Basic information, standard forms, performance reviews that consistently rated him as exceeds expectations in technical areas and meets expectations in interpersonal skills. Nothing to explain why a former NASA engineer was working night shifts fixing circuit boards. Most curious was the hiring documentation. The standard approval chain was incomplete, with the final signature being that of Ethan Slate, her father, and the company's co-founder. He had died 3 years ago after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. Amara picked up her phone. "Cynthia, get me Gerald from the archives. I want the original hiring paperwork for Dean Marshall, not just the digital copies." An hour later, Gerald arrived with a thin folder. "This is all we have, Miss Slate. It's unusual, most of the standard documentation is missing." Amara dismissed him and opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a memo written in her father's distinctive handwriting. Dean Marshall, to be hired at his requested position and shift. Salary at 1.5x standard rate for the role. No questions asked. No background checks beyond basic security. Report directly to me on any issues. At the bottom was a personal note. "If leadership ever loses its soul, let him be its mirror." Amara stared at the paper, her father's words burning into her mind. What had he known? Why had he protected this man? Her phone buzzed with a message from a retired board member, her father's old friend, Thomas Chen. "Amara, I see the Marshall situation is surfacing. Your father brought him in personally after what happened with his wife. He wasn't hired to fix toilets. He was placed by your father to keep this place human. Human." The word struck Amara like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe Slatewave under her leadership or her? She opened her laptop and searched the company archives for Maya Tran Marshall. The results were sparse. Most records had been archived or deleted, but there was enough to piece together a timeline. Maya had joined Slatewave as one of the first 20 employees. She had led the development of their core operating systems. And 3 months before her death, she had submitted a comprehensive safety report, flagging critical issues with the emergency protocols in the manufacturing plants. 2 weeks later, she was terminated. The reason cited was restructuring. 3 weeks after that, she died from what was officially recorded as a cerebral aneurysm. Amara dug deeper, finding an insurance claim that had been denied because Maya's coverage had been terminated with her employment 3 days before it would have become portable under her COBRA benefits. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture Amara didn't want to see. Had her father known? Had he been complicit? Or was bringing Dean Marshall in his way of making amends? As these questions swirled in her mind, Amara received another message, this one from her head of security. "Miss Slate, the situation with Marshall is escalating. Over 70% of employees have engaged with content about him on internal channels. Several news outlets have made inquiries. We need a response strategy." Amara sat back in her chair, the weight of realization settling on her shoulders. The man she had barely noticed in her boardroom, the man she had dismissed as just another maintenance worker, was her father's final warning, and she had failed to heed it. By the third day, Amara had made her decision. The growing whispers needed to be addressed directly on her terms, in her territory. She instructed her assistant to schedule a full department meeting for 2 p.m. in the main conference center. The invitation list was comprehensive. Executives, department heads, team leads, and key personnel from every division. The subject line reads simply: Leadership Values Redefinition, Mandatory Attendance. At 1:45 p.m., the massive conference room began filling with nervous employees. Many had never been in the same room as Amara Slate before, and speculation ran wild about the purpose of the meeting. "It's about the Marshall situation," whispered a product manager. "Has to be. I heard she's announcing a restructuring," countered a UX designer. "Mass layoffs." At precisely 2 p.m., Amara strode into the room, flanked by her executive team. The murmuring instantly ceased. She wore a charcoal suit with blood-red accents, her power colors, and her expression revealed nothing. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice cool and measured. "Recent events have brought to light certain concerns about our company culture and leadership approach." She paused, scanning the room. Nearly 200 faces stared back at her, a mixture of fear curiosity, and barely concealed hostility. Before we proceed, I'd like to welcome a special guest. She nodded to her assistant, who opened a side door. Dean Marshall entered, still wearing his gray coveralls. He looked tired. He'd been called in during what should have been his sleep hours, and visibly uncomfortable as all eyes turned to him. "Mr. Marshall," Amara said, gesturing to an empty chair in the front row. "Please join us." Dean hesitated, then walked slowly to the indicated seat. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft squeak of his work boots on the polished floor. "For those who don't know," Amara continued, "this is Dean Marshall. He works in our facilities maintenance department. He's also become something of a company celebrity in recent days." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. "Mr. Marshall and I had a memorable interaction in the executive boardroom earlier this week. I believe many of you have seen the footage." She clicked a remote, and the now infamous clip played on the large screen behind her. The room watched in tense silence as the scene unfolded. Marcus Reeves stepping into the trash can, Amara's cutting remarks, and finally, Dean's quiet but devastating response. When it ended, Amara turned back to face the room. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "I've invited you here today because I believe in addressing issues directly. You chose to speak up in a closed executive meeting. You've clearly got something to say." She stepped closer to him, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "So tell all of us what gives you the right. You think cleaning cables gives you the right to disrupt senior leadership?" The challenge hung in the air. Every person in the room held their breath, watching Dean. Would he back down? Apologize? Be humiliated like so many before him? Dean slowly rose to his feet. He wasn't tall, shorter than Amara in her heels, but something in his posture commanded attention. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silent room. "No," he said simply. "Cleaning cables doesn't give me that right." He paused, meeting Amara's gaze directly. "But being the husband of a woman your company fired 3 weeks before she died, that gives me more than the right. It gives me the obligation." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Amara's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the podium. "Maya Tran, Marshall," Dean continued, his voice gaining strength. "She was employee number 17 at Slatewave. She wrote half the code that still runs your core systems. And when she found critical flaws in the safety protocols for the manufacturing plants, she did exactly what she was supposed to do. She reported them." He looked around the room, making eye contact with several longtime employees who nodded almost imperceptibly. 2 weeks later, she was terminated. Restructuring, they called it. 3 days before, her insurance would have converted to COBRA coverage. 3 weeks after that, she collapsed in our kitchen while making dinner for our daughter. Dean's voice remained steady, but emotion flickered across his face. "The doctor said it was an aneurysm. Nothing anyone could have done. But Maya had been having headaches for months, headaches she couldn't get checked, because we were suddenly without insurance, scrambling to find coverage." He turned back to Amara. "She died afraid." "Not of dying." Maya was never afraid of anything for herself. She was afraid her warnings would disappear, that the problems she'd identified would hurt someone else. The room was absolutely still. Even the usual sounds of a large gathering, shifting in seats, clearing throats, tapping on phones, had ceased entirely. "Your father hired me a year later. He found me, I never applied. He said Slatewave needed people who remembered what the company was supposed to stand for. He gave me the shift I needed to raise my daughter, and he asked me to watch, to remember." Dean's eyes never left Amara's face as he delivered his final words. "You built machines to replace people like her. I clean those machines every night, and I remember her worth every time one fails." Absolute silence filled the room. One executive's pen dropped from nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that made several people jump. No one moved, no one spoke. Every eye was locked on the tableau at the front of the room. The powerful CEO and the maintenance worker, frozen in a moment of raw truth. Amara stood perfectly still, her face unreadable, but those closest to her could see her hands were shaking. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Amara drew a deep breath. "This meeting is adjourned," she said, her voice barely audible. "We'll reconvene at a later date." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, her executive team scrambling to follow. As the door closed behind her, the spell broke. The room erupted in hushed conversations, people turning to their neighbors with wide eyes and shocked expressions. Several approached Dean, offering handshakes or quiet words of support, but he politely excused himself and slipped out a side door. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Lily. "Dad, are you okay? Zoe says something big happened at your work." Dean smiled faintly and typed back, "I'm fine, kiddo. Just told a story that needed telling. See you at dinner." He put his phone away and headed toward the exit, unaware that the earthquake he had just triggered would reshape the very foundation of Slatewave Robotics. For 6 days following the confrontation, Amara Slate vanished from public view. No emails, no appearances, no statements. Crisis management teams prepared for worst-case scenarios. Her resignation, a company sale, or scorched earth retaliation against the staff who had rallied behind Dean Marshall. But something entirely different was happening behind closed doors. In her private office, Amara immersed herself in Maya Tran Marshall's archive files. She read technical specifications, safety reports, and personal notes. She reviewed security footage from the manufacturing floors. She interviewed night staff who had worked alongside Dean for years. Most significantly, she spent hours with her father's personal journals, records she had ignored after his death, too busy steering the company toward her vision of technological dominance. What she found shattered the narrative she had built her career upon. Her father had indeed suppressed Maya's warnings to preserve the company's image ahead of a crucial funding round. The decision had haunted him until his death. His final journal entry, dated 2 days before his fatal stroke, read simply, "Legacy isn't what you build. It's who survives after you've hurt them." On the 7th day, Amara called a company-wide town hall. Attendance was optional, but the auditorium filled to capacity, with thousands more watching the live stream from offices worldwide. When Amara walked onto the stage, audible gasps rippled through the crowd. Gone was the sharp-edged power suit and severe hairstyle. She wore simple dark slacks and a blue button-down shirt, practical clothes for actual work. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She approached the microphone without notes or teleprompter. "I've spent the past week learning about a company I thought I knew," she began, her voice softer than anyone had heard before. "What I discovered is that I've been running a shadow of what Slatewave was meant to be." She paused, visibly gathering herself. "I shamed people for cracks in the foundation without ever checking who laid the beams. That ends now." For the next 30 minutes, Amara outlined a comprehensive restructuring of Slatewave's corporate culture. Not layoffs, but a fundamental shift in how the company operated, valued its people, and measured success. "Effective immediately, we're launching Project Atlas," she announced. "A complete review and overhaul of our safety protocols, workplace policies, and company values." She gestured to the side of the stage, where Dean Marshall stood quietly. "To lead this initiative alongside me, I've asked someone who has shown more integrity and commitment to Slatewave's true mission than anyone in this building. Dean Marshall has agreed to serve as our Director of Culture and Integrity, reporting directly to me and the board." Murmurs of surprise and approval spread through the audience. "Additionally, we will be establishing the Maya Tran Marshall Memorial Fund for Innovation Safety, with an initial endowment of $50 million. This fund will support research and implementation of safety measures across the tech industry, with a focus on protecting the humans who build and maintain our technological future." As she concluded her remarks, Amara did something no one had ever seen her do in public. She stepped away from the podium and sat down on the edge of the stage, making herself physically lower than her audience. "I've done a lot of talking today," she said. "Now I want to listen. This company belongs to all of us. Tell me what you need it to become." 1 year later, Slatewave Robotics had transformed. The stock price had initially dipped following Amara's dramatic shift in leadership style, but had since rebounded to record highs as the company's renewed focus on ethical innovation attracted both talent and investors. The boardroom, where the confrontation had begun, was now unrecognizable. The imposing obsidian table had been replaced with a circular design that eliminated hierarchical seating, and beneath the glass surface, embedded where all could see it, was a simple bronze plaque, in memory of the builders you didn't see. Today, the room was filled for the unveiling of Slatewave's new corporate symbol, a satellite antenna encircling a silhouette of a woman reaching for the moon, based on Maya's last prototype design. Dean stood at the center of the gathering, still wearing his coveralls, despite his executive title. He had refused the corner office they'd offered him, preferring to keep his workshop near the manufacturing floor where he could directly observe operations and talk with staff at all levels. Maya didn't want revenge, he said, his hand resting lightly on the plaque. Just to be remembered. Just to stop others from being erased. He looked around the room at the faces of people who had become not just colleagues but friends over the past year. She would be proud of what we've built here. Not the technology, though, that's impressive, but the community. The culture where speaking up is valued more than speaking loudly. As he finished speaking, the room rose in a standing ovation. The HR staff and interns stood first, followed by middle management, and finally, the executive team. Amara, standing quietly at the back, was the last to join, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The changes at Slatewave extended far beyond symbolic gestures. Amara now personally reviewed all staff evaluations, focusing particularly on how managers treated their teams during challenging periods. She had promoted the most junior team lead to vice president of engineering after witnessing his exceptional ability to nurture talent in others. Most notably, she had begun speaking differently, more softly, more thoughtfully, choosing words that built rather than demolished. Dean maintained his dual role, continuing some maintenance work by choice while directing the company's cultural transformation. His daughter Lily had become a regular visitor to the campus, often doing homework in the cafeteria, where employees would stop by to help with science projects or share stories about her mother's contributions to the technology they used every day. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Dean and Lily sat together on a bench outside the Slatewave building, watching employees leave for the weekend. "Dad," Lily asked, "do you ever miss NASA? Building things that go to space?" Dean considered the question. "Sometimes. But I've realized something important. The hardest engineering problems aren't about machines. They're about people." He watched as Amara exited the building, stopping to help an intern who had dropped an armful of tablets. The two laughed together as they gathered the devices, a scene unimaginable a year earlier. "You know what real strength is, kiddo?" Dean said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "It's being the only one to speak when everyone else stays quiet." Lily leaned against him, like Mom did. "Like Mom did?" he agreed. "And sometimes that one voice is enough to change everything." As the sun set behind the Slatewave building, its new logo caught the fading light, a woman reaching for the stars, surrounded by technology designed to amplify human potential rather than replace it. The company that had once valued machines over people had found its humanity again, guided by the quiet voice of a man who had never forgotten what truly mattered. The annual Slatewave Innovation Summit buzzed with energy as industry leaders gathered to witness what insiders called the Slatewave miracle. Dean adjusted his tie backstage, a rare departure from his usual coveralls. "Nervous?" Amara appeared beside him, her transformation still striking. The severe bob was gone, replaced by a softer style framing a face that had learned to smile. "Terrified," Dean admitted. "I fix things. I don't talk about fixing things to thousands of people." "Just tell the truth," she said. "It's worked pretty well so far." On stage, Amara's opening remarks were brief. "Our stock price has increased 40%. Employee retention has reached 97%. But numbers don't capture what really matters, the culture we've built together." The audience rose in standing ovation as Dean approached the microphone. "I'm an engineer," he began. "I believe in measuring things." He clicked through slides showing workplace safety incidents reduced to 0, employee satisfaction up 83%, and photos of the new on-campus childcare center. "But the most important number," Dean said, his voice softening, "is 1. The screen behind him showed Maya's photo. One person who spoke up. One voice that refused to be silenced, even after death. One legacy that transformed an entire company. Lily joined them on stage carrying a small box containing a pin with the new Slatewave logo, a woman reaching for the stars. Each year, we will honor one employee who had the courage to speak truth when it was difficult. We call it the Tran Marshall Courage Award. The first recipient was Marcus Reeves, the executive once humiliated in the trash can, now a vocal advocate for the new company culture. Later that evening, Dean found himself alone on the rooftop garden. The San Francisco skyline glittered before him like a constellation of human innovation. "Room for one more?" Amara asked, joining him. "Always," Dean replied. She handed him a yellowed paper from her father's files. In Ethan Slate's handwriting were the words, "Marshall understands what we've forgotten, that technology without humanity is just expensive garbage." Dean smiled faintly. He wasn't wrong. As they looked out over the city, Dean thought about the journey from NASA to night shifts, from grief to purpose, from silence to a voice that had changed thousands of lives. Tomorrow, he would go back to his workshop. He would still fix broken circuits, but he would also continue building something far more valuable, a company where humanity and technology advance together, each serving the other's highest purpose. And somewhere, he knew Maya was smiling. If you enjoyed this story about a quiet hero who stood up for what's right, please hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us how one person's courage can change everything. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.